Hey, Laura.
Hi, I'm wondering about this idea of violence being denying the truth of another. But sometimes truth is so, the truth of another can be so wrong or so violent. How does one acknowledge it when we know that what they think is true is going to cause so much harm? You know, that she said that denying the truth of another is full of violence. So how do we find, as what Mr. Judge says, it's a duty of a student to find the truth in what another one is saying? How do we find that truth when it appears to be so untrue?
Okay. Anyone have anyone going to answer Laura's question? Anybody have any comments on that question or other ways? Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a very fair question, actually, and a very exacting one. And perhaps what it requires is certain distinctions. Nandini was talking more about the violent reaction to something which implies by the person reacting that they are absolutizing their own point of view or their own belief or their own truth. And that becomes an impediment for the other person, particularly if they are wrong or they are advocating something that is violent. It's important to recognize that there's some grain of truth in what they say. Actually, often there is. It's just their way of conceiving of it and expressing it is so repugnant. But if you can begin, I've seen the Dalai Lama do this. If you begin by not reacting or overreacting to what they say, that's important. Secondly, what you do is repeat back to them, do I understand you to be saying this? And if they say, well, no, what I'm saying is this. Okay, let me be clear. So then this is what you mean. Is that correct? I want to be sure that I understand what you're saying here, that you say so passionately and with such fervor. I can appreciate and understand that. But let's look at what you're saying because I need to understand it better, because I find it difficult. So here's how I'm trying to understand it. And so you begin a kind of conversation where you lower the temperature and then you try to see that, look, he's listening to me or she's listening to me. Somewhere that's registering with them. Instead of giving me their ideological response, they're actually participating with me in my own thinking, because a nonviolent person is more concerned with understanding the thinking behind a point of view and the value it implies than he is about the belief. In a wonderful article, her husband, Nandini Iyer, this incredible article on Gandhi, it just blew me away when I read it. But he said Gandhi was not so much concerned with beliefs. What he was concerned with is values, and pointing out, is this what you really value? Is this what you really cherish? Do you mind that doing this might cause a lot of harm or suffering? Are you aware of this? Perhaps you weren't. So to point to these things can really become, you reverse what seems to be evil into something good. What seems to be confrontational into something that's more harmonic and understanding. Because your point is you're going to tell the person, I'm not trying to change you or convince you. I just want to understand you. And that goes a long way with all of us. It's like Gandhi said, he said, what are the most difficult words to say in a marriage? I was wrong. No, person still, no, I was wrong. No, I was wrong. It's kind of hard to, okay, really? You're admitting you were wrong? Yes, I was wrong. Now he said, what's the other most difficult words is, I apologize. That's the real winner. I apologize. Self-correcting is extremely important. It's amazing how these little mantras that Gandhi points to can be so universally applicable in every kind of relationship that we can have. And so that's a way that might be seen.
The other thing that she talked about was inner violence.
Yeah.
the violence that is within us, that like a feeling of frustration is a form of violence that is on the inner planes of our being. So when we feel those frustrations arise, how do we change those on the inner planes of our being? We can sit there and we can not react to that feeling, but how do we root it out?
Can you clarify the question? Because we just discussed that how you can approach it with someone else. So you're saying now, how do you deal with yourself when you're
Yes,
you recognize these
the inner violence, like the feeling of frustration.
Well, you know, there
that
is,
a violent feeling?
for whatever it's worth, on the aphorisms on karma, number 13, number 12, I'll say, karmic causes already set in motion must be allowed to sweep on until exhausted, but this permits no man to refuse to help his fellows and every sentient being. Okay, now, number 13, the effects may be counteracted or mitigated by the thoughts and acts of oneself or of another. And then the resulting effects represent the combination and interaction of the whole number of causes involved in producing the effects. Now, maybe I'm being a little too theoretical, but, and also like in the Return of Cyclic Impressions, in where he knows these, if you notice these moods of melancholy or despondency or whatever, nowadays we'd say depression, right? But you can set up countervailing causes, perhaps, and that might be a whole exercise in the use of the controlled imagination. You know, if a person really sets about to doing this, and it seems like it's a more difficult path. In some ways, it's easier to just react, right? Because then all you have to do is just let the elementals just kind of jump around and cause havoc. But this whole other path, I guess, which would require a certain fearlessness, I guess, and humility, and the exercise of the imagination and set up countervailing causes might be part of the answer, but I'm not saying that's the whole picture.
I'm just wondering if we could connect what Professor Iyer said to the Promethean task before us, because she quoted Prometheus at the end, that this is not a single sacrifice of a single human being for humanity, but it's an eternal sacrifice. It isn't that it isn't going to get better, because we know it is as more people join with us, but that in a sense, really feeling one with humanity and not reacting violently to another is the eternal sacrifice we have to make, which is, Jim Tepper has pointed out, is really no sacrifice at all, because it is part of going along with the evolution of the cosmos and with humanity. I wonder if we could address that more, because I think this is part of Gandhi's great truth.
Yeah. You know, I'd like to, Judy, just make one response to Laura's question, because the whole idea of inner violence is really where it's at. And I thought Jonathan's concluding acute observation about fearlessness and humility going together is extremely important. And furthermore, I think often when we experience this frustration, it's because we haven't done enough regular self-study to be aware of the causal factors that John was pointing out that's occurring. This is why the Pythagorean nightly review is so vital in maintaining some kind of continuity, because it's not about self-absorption in my problems and why am I. It's trying to understand the mind that participates in the world. A lot of the mind participates and is part of the world. And when it's polluted or when it's obscured, it's very difficult for it to see the world in some richer sense in which it really is. And so the light is kind of within the heart, cannot manifest through the mind because the lens of the mind is so obscured or polluted. So this is why self-study is cleansing the lens. It's realizing there's light there, and that light can actually reveal different kind of topography of the world. Because often what we're reacting to is the lesser element in something or in someone. And our frustrations are because we're not able to really express in some genuine, pure way what we really at heart would like to do. So that fearlessness in terms of both looking at principles and seeing where you did good. Pythagoras says, look at that first. Don't just look at you had a hell of a day. Try to see if I look and scan the whole day, what can I see? And it doesn't have to be done by me. It could be something someone else did that's really wonderful. When you salute that, you lift yourself up. And when you see it and you see it genuinely, and then you can see it in others, you forget yourself and you then enter into a domain which is a larger sense of self. And so you begin to expand the circle of what you think is self-study into a collective study. And so you then grow in your understanding, and it becomes really quite rewarding. And you don't get so bedazzled. Oh, I lost my cool today. What did Gandhi do when he had to call off a big program of protest because of violence? He said, I made a Himalayan blunder. He didn't just say a blunder, a Himalayan blunder. People were not ready. My mistake. Now I've got to go about trying to correct it. But he didn't beat himself, flagell himself, take himself to the street and say, oh, whoa, look at me. No, he got to he admitted it and moved. That's what we have to do. Pythagoras said, look at the good. When you look at the bad, give yourself a little chastisement, but then see what you need to do to start the process of healing it. It takes time. But have confidence, as Nandini says. You have to have that ultimate confidence that Gandhi pointed to in Theosophy, absolutely puts forth. The greatest beings say they have total confidence in human beings, no matter what their condition, if they are willing to cooperate with the good in themselves and the good in others. Now, Shobha, you should say something. You're not on.
She's working on unmuting.
Oh, I see.
Well, it goes back to that whole thing about the vow of silence and when to be able to, the listening, when you said about the listening, I kept thinking how important it is to listen to somebody else with your full mind and willing to listen. Gandhi's most amazing thing was when he talked to the murderer with such compassion, willing to listen to him. And he was so mortified and shocked that he was willing to listen to him with such attention. It was a genuine thing, said Jim, about, I thought that was so profound, listening with complete non-judgmental listening. I don't think we do enough of it most of the time. It's such a difficult thing to do. And Gandhi did say it wasn't easy. And Nandini talks about it. Professor Nandini Iyer talks about it, how difficult it is to do. But it was a line of life's meditation for Gandhi, He did it all his life.
Very apt phrase for them.
Yeah.
Very apt phrase. I saw once the Dalai Lama being interviewed on television, but a one-to-one interview. And it was stunning to see when the other person made a comment, he was instantly, not aggressively, just instantly, fully, his whole being was responding to listening to the person. And the person in time just started bringing out more that was behind his question, and felt more at ease. By the time they left, they were friends. It was, it was just that. Why? Because you give reality to the person when you pay attention. Whatever you pay attention to becomes karmically real. It becomes activated. So his putting attention on the meaning of what the person is saying, trying to draw them out and clarify, helps them become clear, helps them feel more real. Someone is taking me seriously, because often violent people don't feel they're really real sometimes because they have to have their way or it's not the real world. So his doing that kind of disarms people, and it gives them something to stand on that's stronger.
There's a Thich Nhat Hanh interview with Oprah, actually. You can find it on YouTube, right? Where he talks about deep listening, and he's mentioning there the tendency to try and solve problems when we listen. Oh, but if you just do this, and the best deep listening, as he calls it, is such that when one restrains from doing that and just hears them out, hears the person out.
I think that's, Carl Rogers, Raghavan used to mention that Carl Rogers had this wonderful thing when he had couples counseling, and he would tell, okay, now you're here, you husband, be quiet, you wife, you say now what you see the problem is, and here's the thing, husband, you may not respond, listen to what she says. She then says her piece, okay? But meanwhile, the husband sitting there on the edge of the seat can't wait till the whole thing, until she stops talking so he can respond. And right away, Carl Rogers says, now, wait a second, husband. She just said her piece, right? He nods his head. Now, what I want you to do is not tell me your response. I'm not interested in your response right now. You tell me, what did you hear her say? Only what did you hear her say? Tell her what you heard, not what you think of it, but what you heard. And so he would go, oh, what she heard, what I heard. Oh yeah, okay. Well, this is what I understood you to be saying. And you could see her shaking her head. And he would say, now you have to be quiet, wife, while he tells you what he thinks he heard. Then when he finishes, he says, now you be quiet. And he says, now you tell me, is that what you really meant to be saying to your husband? Well, not exactly. What I mean is, and then say he would go back and forth until eventually she distilled it down to what her fundamental point was. He then, oh, that's what you're saying. So now they had a basis of clarity and mutual understanding. And Carl Rogers said, half the problem was already solved. I thought that was brilliant, just absolutely brilliant. Raghavan said, if you could just do that more in human relationships in general, it would be amazing. This is deep listening, deep talking.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, does anyone have any other points or questions or follow-throughs or anything like that? Isn't it interesting that in Theosophy we're given this thing about absolute truth and relative truth, and or even given the idea of the first fundamental and so forth. And I was wondering if that can help us understand something about relative truths, other than just them being so relative that it's just nihilism. Oh, well, that's your truth. Well, this is my truth. But then there's this idea that there is such thing as absolute truth, but it's unknowable, it's unspeakable. But on the other hand, there's different. Can the relative truths be seen as some kind of a ladder or some kind of a path?
If we think about an infant, the infant doesn't say, oh, someday I'll be an 80-year-old person. But that process is, in a sense, what we're talking about with relative truth. It's accurate at the moment, but it's in flux. Whereas there's a deeper truth that never changes. And it's not something that we can name as easily, but we have a deep spiritual reality that's behind everything.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Quite true. In a sense, the ultimate truth is self-mirroring. It mirrors itself in the core of everything. And so the extent to which the mind is something of a pure lens, it can reflect more of the truth. Now, when you said, Jonathan, about my truth,
Mhm.
Gandhi would said, I really hope it is your truth. Because if it is your truth, that means you should be authentic and living it. And if you're living it, you should be able to validate how true it is and where perhaps it's excessive or lacking. So that would be good. Just be responsible for it. And then you will learn, like I learned, how challenging it is to make a truth more real and realize it, move it from the intellectual. Because Gandhi said, whatever appeals to both my reason and my heart and makes the most sense, that's what I give myself to absolutely at the moment. But I'm always in the position to be corrected or shown that what I thought to be true, believed to be true, and that's the only way I can act is if I really believe it's true. Otherwise, I'm being false. But then I can then turn back and be able to refine it or reject it if necessary. That's a pretty extreme thing, but you could. So at any rate, make it real is what Gandhi say. If you suffer for it, it's usually real.
We can always count on karma for corrections.
That's what he said. He said, if you actually give yourself the truth, karma will take cover of it. Karma will help you over time. Nothing does it for you, but it will help you. Life will come to your aid. When a person is committed to a noble or benevolent cause, and they're striving for that, and they're learning from other people who are exemplifying it, in time, nature becomes your ally. More than we realize, there are those that are helping us. In fact, Eisenhower, of all people, said that. He said, no, when you commit yourself to something decent and wholesome and true, there's more that comes to our age because there's so much fundamental human decency in people that rarely gets tapped because there are not enough examples of it to draw out people's commitment to it. But when you do, it's surprising how it countervails all the other negativity.
We have a chat from Monica here. This presentation by Nandini Iyer is so magnificent. Now I see why she was so beloved and respected, a great teacher. Learning and absorbing from these comments and truly grateful for all. Namaste.
But beautifully put.
This just one thing here is that it seems that it's one thing for us to say, well, there's these great teachers and so forth that we've heard about, but it seems that in a nucleus of brotherhood where people are trying to work together for humanity and for the future, we get attached to things about how things should be done and how things should be worded and phrased and so forth. And we thought a lot of things through from theosophical perspectives, from what we think are principles, and they are principles. And yet it's so hard to kind of relax and be detached and have enough distance to step away from our points of view. And I think even working in a theosophical context, somehow things get heated up. And there's a tendency to think that things are so important because it's the movement after all, and it has to do with great teachers and Mahatmas and so forth. And so it just seems that these principles of self-examination and listening to others and acknowledging their values and their ability, as Nandini said, to think for themselves. That was pretty powerful, I thought, what she was saying. She's saying, when I think my point of view is absolutely true, de facto, by definition, I'm saying that you don't have a right to think for yourself. I mean, if you're my opponent in a given situation.
You also violate absolute truth when you say that. You're violating the nature of the truth itself when you say your particular view, but it's absolute.
Mm-hmm.
And you're preventing further growth.
we're looking forward to hearing from Helena next week on the caduceus. So thank you all very much for coming and for your thoughtful questions and conversation. And thanks to Nandini, and thanks to Theosophy.